Weapons, weapons and more weapons. This was Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba's demand from the NATO members today. As the war nears the end of its 6th week, Ukraine is pushing the West to increase its arms supplies, heavier weaponry, air defense systems, artillery, armored vehicles and jets. Kiev wants them all in order to push back against the Russian offensive, which has turned its focus to the country's east and south. Ahead of the meeting, Kuleba was clear in his demands.
My agenda is very simple. It has only 3 items on it. It's weapons, weapons and weapons. We are confident that the best way to help Ukraine now is to provide it with all necessary to contain Putin and to defeat Russian army in Ukraine, in the territory.
Kuleba also said that Germany can still do more, noting that allies remain reluctant to send the so-called offensive arms. Kuleba said that there was no distinction between defensive and offensive when it comes to Ukraine. While NATO has refused to send troops to Ukraine, it has been sending crucial weapons, including anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, a sentiment which was echoed by the NATO chief. Today, Kuleba will sit down with his NATO counterparts in Brussels and tell them about the horrors of the war. It is the 2nd day of talks for the NATO foreign ministers, and the focus remains on how to better help Ukraine. Rosie, if you can first take us through the developments so far. The demand from the Ukrainian minister is very clear, but at the same time, NATO, when it comes to its commitment, has also been deliberating on what more can be done at this point.
Absolutely. NATO allies are here in talks today in this building where I am to try and work out how best to support Ukraine as this conflict rages on. Now, these talks come at what NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg calls a critical moment. He warns that Russian troops in Ukraine may be regrouping, resupplying and readying for a major push in eastern and southern Ukraine, perhaps in a bid to take the entire Donbas region. That's why he says he expects NATO allies to continue to pledge to continue supplying Ukraine with weapons. And we heard that request very clearly from Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister. I was there as he arrived, and I also asked him if he was satisfied so far with West's approach to sanctions. He said he was glad that there had been movement on sanctions, but that they do not yet go far enough.
Right. What about the measures to also counter the threat of biological weapons, chemical weapons being used in Ukraine?
Well, that was something we heard from the last NATO meeting, that NATO allies were in fact ready to provide Ukraine with defensive equipment for chemical attacks, in terms of biological attacks. That's something that they had already revealed, was something they'll likely be following up on during these talks, and that's something that NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has raised the alarm about in the past, the potential of Russia staging a chemical weapons attack or launching a chemical weapons attack on Ukraine. And of course, that has major implications and major risks if it were to be the case for spillover into NATO countries, for example, neighbouring Poland, which neighbours Ukraine, which is a member of the alliance, and that means it is party to the alliance's collective defence agreement known as Article 5, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. It's one of the invited guests today. Dmytro Kuleba, Foreign Minister, is one of NATO's guests at this meeting, and that's precisely why it can't count on any more concrete NATO support other than these weapons, because there will be, as NATO says, no boots on the ground in Ukraine, no NATO boots on the ground, due to Ukraine not being a member of the alliance.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Rosie, thanks very much for getting us up to speed with the latest coming in. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.